everybody. It is Dean Z speaking to you from the beautiful Lawyers Club at the University of Michigan Law School. Things are looking a little different today than usual, aren't they? It is because I'm very excited about this episode. I've been trying to make it happen for a while. We are going to be interviewing, me meaning me. I don't know why I was using the royal we, but whatever. I am going to be interviewing the illustrious Ramji Kaul, who is our head of career planning. Ramji has been with us since 2016, in career planning. He is an alum of the law school, but in between graduating, he was in my very first full class, the people that I admitted, in between graduating and coming back to us. Ramji worked for a big law firm in Chicago and eventually becoming a partner, being very active in the hiring process in that role. So he knows a lot about the private sector employment hiring market for lawyers. And we're very lucky to have him at the law school. And now I want to pick his brain and pull out all his genius for you guys to learn from about things that are changing in the world of legal employment. Welcome, Ramji.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see. I have a bunch of questions that I have written out for you. We'll see if we can stump you or something.
Go for it.
Okay. I just want to jump in with a very broad question about what changes have you seen in the last a little bit in private sector hiring? Maybe since you started, or maybe I feel like the changes have come a lot recently. So.
Yeah, I mean, there have been much more changes recently than there were sort of in the first 5 years that I was back. Mm-hmm. Certainly since COVID. So I guess I would say the changes I would put them into three buckets. So one is the timeline for when hiring is happening is changing. Mm-hmm. The second one is how people are applying for jobs.
Okay.
It used to be that it was a lot of the applications come through what I'd call school organized programs, OCIs. We used to call it early interview week, right?
Yep.
Now there's a lot more applications happening through direct applications to law firms.
All right.
And then the last one is the mode of the interview. So on-campus interviewing. So on campus, it was in person. It was, people talking to each other face to face. Now much of the interviewing is happening, via Zoom type program. So kind of have all those big changes. There's some changes that are happening like in the interview process itself, but like those are the big ones I think that students notice.
Those are a lot of changes that you've mentioned in the process. Do you have an idea about what caused them? What led to all this change?
So there were, I think, two big things that led to the change. So one was the industry organization called NELP.
Yeah.
Used to have guidelines for law schools and legal employers that sort of set out general timelines for when things should happen. And most people adhered to those. About, 6 years ago, kind of right before COVID, NELP withdrew those guidelines and said, we think there needs to be innovation in the marketplace. We should let firms recruit however makes sense to them. Law schools, you can set whatever guidelines make sense for your particular, student populations.
Okay.
So that's one.
And just, my understanding is the reason they made that change is because they were concerned about antitrust rules. So that putting these timelines in place decreased competition among firms.
That's right. Okay. That was the push for innovation, right?
Got it.
So that alone probably doesn't cause this amount of change this rapidly. But when you take that and you add it to the fact that the pandemic hypercharged people's familiarity with technology.
Sure.
And you had an entire industry that suddenly became well accustomed from the top to the bottom with, sort of video conferencing technology.
Yeah.
You put those two together and now all of a sudden you have the capacity for firms to recruit directly without having to come on campus, right? And so you put those two together. We had to do this remotely for 1 to 2 cycles, depending on where you were in the country. And all of a sudden you have a new sort of process altogether.
Okay, the one that I want to focus on at the outset is you mentioned the timeline change in the timing. Later, earlier, what's the change?
Earlier, much earlier.
Okay.
So just to give context, right? So when I first started in this job, so early interview week when the majority of all interviews would happen was the first week of August.
Right.
When I was here as a student, it was the last week of August.
Yeah.
Now it's, through direct applications, now it's like it starts the first week of June, if not earlier, right? So like we're really now at the front end of the square.
So I have so many questions following from that, but I also want to clarify at this juncture that, obviously your expertise, as mine, is specifically with what happens at the University of Michigan Law School, but you also know a lot that is happening at many other law schools. But I assume that your answers for a lot of these questions are going to be focused on the kinds of schools where lots of employers are interested in hiring lots of students. So, more schools with more of a national footprint.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, you could think of it that way. You could think of it schools that have big law firms recruiting at their schools.
Yeah.
So if there's a school that has most of their students are heading to big law, that's obviously, this is going to be a much bigger sort of focus and issue. If a school has fewer students that are heading off into big law, right, there's only going to be a smaller section that has to sort of deal with these new complications.
Okay.
You can think of it either by the school or by where the firms are coming.
Fantastic. Okay. So given the changes, though, that you have mentioned of timing, manner of application, and now I've forgotten the third one. What's wrong with me?
Video.
Oh, right. Video as opposed to in person. What do you think the biggest difference for a student entering, say, in 2025 versus a student who entered in 2015? Like, what's the biggest difference for them? What should they be doing differently, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, so the biggest difference that, if you were to take two people going through law school at different times, what they would say is that when they had to start paying attention to sort of career exploration.
Okay.
Right? So 2015, up here, and most law schools wouldn't start meeting with 1Ls until mid-October, and 1Ls wouldn't even begin to be thinking about applying to jobs for their 1L summer until December 1st.
Okay.
And we wouldn't really even begin prepping students and really focusing on the 2L summer hiring process until really towards the end of the 1L year. That's what it used to be.
Okay.
So what's different now? Now, last week at orientation, we had multiple hours of conversations with students about, job options and hiring timelines and things like that. We'll start meeting with students. We give them a couple of weeks to get acclimated to school, but by mid-September, we're meeting one-on-one with them. So that's, I think, what the students would experience as being different. And different schools have different approaches as to when they meet students. Some are a little bit later, some are actually earlier than us. But, schools are making decisions as to what makes sense given their culture, how their faculty sort of view the process, those kinds of things. But from a second half of your question was like prep.
Yes.
Right? I would say that I guess what's changed is it's still fine to arrive at law school not knowing what you want to do. I mean, that part, when I don't know, to be honest, when I started here, if somebody was like, well, Ramji, what kind of lawyer do you want to be? I would have said a good one, and that would be the end of it.
Did you meet your goal?
I met my goal, I think. I don't know, other people have told me. But I think now when students get here, they have to be intentional about trying to go through the process as opposed to just letting it come to them.
So you think it will be a benefit to students who are thinking about coming to law school, or applicants who are thinking about coming to law school, to maybe start thinking a little bit more seriously about what exactly they want to do with their legal career. So do you have any advice for a student who's applying this year, who's confident they want to be a lawyer, but hasn't worked as a paralegal, or maybe has, but knows it's in a sector that they don't plan to return to? How can they gain a more sophisticated understanding of the various types of interest areas?
I can answer that in two ways, right? So the first one I would say is nobody realistically expects a student, even when they get to the hiring market at the end of their 1L year, to have it all figured out. I mean, that's certainly, nobody realistically expects that. I say that, as I've encouraged our students, I was like, you got to get to a level of informed uncertainty.
Okay, I like that.
And I say like, okay, so like imagine if Sarah, you and I are going to go out for dinner, and I say, do you want to go out for Indian food, Chinese food, or Mexican food? One response to that is, I've never heard of any of those. Okay, you picked Ramji. All right. Another would be, do you want to go out for Indian food, Chinese food, Mexican food? And you say, I've heard of those. I've tried some of it. I don't have a clear preference as to which one we go for, but they all sound good to me. That's the kind, like you're trying to get to that level of knowledge, I think. So like, then the question is, okay, before I get to law school, what can I do?
Right. That seems very manageable, I just want to say.
Yeah, it is manageable, but it does require effort, right?
Sure.
Like because you do have to, and there's these barriers I think that students feel to trying to figure this out, because the really only way you can do it is by talking to people.
All right.
And so that raises issues of perhaps I don't have any lawyers in my family. I don't know who to talk to. Maybe I'm not that sophisticated at networking because I'm coming straight through. Also me.
I should have noted in this juncture that not only did you come straight through, you started law school about 5 seconds after you graduated.
It was 20 days.
20 days.
It was not a lot of time.
Yeah.
I am still very confident. I was probably one of the most naive people that ever started here as a 1L.
Yeah.
In terms of what I understood about the practice, what I understood about what I wanted to do, and what I understood about myself. But
yeah.
I made it, and so like I think that's still possible.
I love that.
Yeah. So what do students do before they get to law school and try to figure out which kind of food they might want to be interested in trying? I think the big thing is that they have to be intentional about trying to figure it out, right? It's not just going to happen organically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of it a lot of, thinking of networking as a research tool. So when you go and you meet let's say you reach out to somebody who's working at a law firm and you're hopefully, going to try to figure out something about their world. Like you got to ask good questions. It's not, oh, what's your firm like? Mm-hmm. That yields broad sort of generic answers. People need to be looking for very specific pieces of information.
Can you give some examples? I feel like people love hearing specifics. What might be 2 or 3 really good questions?
So I think when you're asking questions, I say ask people questions, not policy questions. So this
people questions.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying ask people questions. It's like, well, who else would you ask?
Type of questions.
People questions.
Yes.
Got it.
And for a law student, as opposed to sort of applying to law school, I think this is easier to sort of explain, but we could kind of come up with other ones. But so imagine somebody's very interested in mentoring, right?
Okay.
Like how does mentoring happen at this particular organization?
Okay.
The policy question would be, how does mentoring happen at this particular organization?
Yeah.
And most law firms are going to give a pretty generic answer, right?
Sure.
As opposed to the people question, which is, who are your mentors at the firm and how did you find them?
Got it.
Right? You get the implementation of the policy, and you can ask that same question to 4 different people. And if you start to get similar answers each time, you can really begin to get a sense for like, oh, this is what the culture of this place is actually like. It's probably a good approach for asking questions of law students when you come to preview weekend too.
Yes. I mean, it's a good approach for asking questions anywhere, but it makes me think of advice that we give about writing a personal statement, which is, I feel that asking the right kind of question, it requires you to do the work to think about what's important to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's where the work comes in.
100%. I call it building the compass, right? Like you've got to build your compass to know what you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
And so what a student could do is start writing out, like journaling. Like what are the things I'm already doing, either in my student orgs if I'm an undergrad, or that if I'm working currently. Like what are the days that I feel really excited? What are the days that make me happy? Like what's the thing that's happening? You'd mentioned like, what if I'm a paralegal, but I might want to be transferring to a different, right? But so what are the things that I really like? And over time, if you journal, you might be able to find some trends.
Yeah.
You might be able to find like, oh, it's not really the subject matter that I'm interested in. It's this type of project that I'm being given, or it's this kind of outcome that makes me feel good. And so then when you're asking questions of you exploring, I don't know, project finance practice, something that sounds very intimidating. Somebody says something that...
I don't know what that is. No, I do, but...
Building big things is essentially finding it.
Okay.
But then when you're talking with somebody and they start talking about their day and what they do on a day-to-day basis, you might find some traction against, oh, like that sounds a lot like this thing that I really like to do.
Okay.
Concrete example of this would be, I was a litigation partner at a law firm.
Right.
And I sat down and I started doing this, and I realized my best days, my favorite days, were actually deposition prep.
Okay.
I loved that far more than actually being in a courtroom or writing a brief or the wins that came after, sort of like it was the deposition prep. I really liked working with people one-on-one.
Yeah, I guess, explain what deposition prep might be.
Deposition prep would, fair enough. Deposition prep would be before a deposition, which is the legal process of asking questions of the other side during discovery, or defending your own witness as they're being asked questions during discovery. Before that happens, you sit with your witness and you prep them.
Okay.
Here are the kinds of questions you're going to be asked. How might you answer that? You get them comfortable with the process. You get them comfortable answering questions.
Yeah.
And you just sort of give them a guide for what the process looks like. Those were the days I loved most. Those were the days I came home and I got to say to, people I share with my life with, like, hey, this was a good day.
Good day. And so where did that take you in terms of the rest of your career, that insight?
Well, when I was thinking about doing something other than practicing at a big firm, right, I was like, well, how do I do more of that?
Okay.
And so and it wasn't like I wanted to leave the firm, but some of it might have been, how am I going to adjust my practice so that I can do more of these types of projects and less of projects that I'm not as interested in? That's the owning your career piece.
Okay.
And I had never really considered working in a career planning office. But when I got this opportunity and I started thinking about what are my best days, you can draw a line to what I spend most of my day doing when I'm working with students, is helping them understand the process, explaining to them, working with them, helping them develop confidence. That's all. My ability to sort of look at this job and say, that's something I'm going to be excited about, was only possible because I'd done that introspective exercise beforehand. So you're totally right. Asking the good questions, doing the career exploration requires you to sort of know yourself a little bit. And I think my story, if you were to take a theme or a sort of a takeaway from it, is it doesn't end after when you get your first job out of law school. That's why career planning is a discipline. It's a tool that you're going to use over and over as long as you're, sort of involved in any area of the law or otherwise.
Great. Okay, that's very helpful. Also, I noticed you really love your analogies, don't you?
Storytelling.
Excellent. All right. So with taking all that into account, at what point in the process do you think a law student, so not an applicant, but a law student, at what point do they need to narrow down their views on what type of practice area, the location of the office, a particular potential employer to target? When do they need to have done that?
I think, it's just it depends on whether we're talking about a 1L summer or the 2L summer, because those timelines can be different.
Maybe we could actually, Yeah. That's a very fair point. Maybe you could just right now do a quick little, when do people work?
When do people work?
Yeah.
So students arrive at law school, and the first semester we spend most of the time talking about sort of basic application materials and options for your 1L summer. The applications for 1L summer are usually, this is a very unfair part of the first year, is the applications generally open right around when exams are.
Yeah.
So we tell
all law schools. This
is all law schools.
This is nothing to do.
Yeah.
Right.
So what we tell the students is we try to front load some of the work in career planning early in the semester so that they can focus on school once, exams roll around. But that's when that application is, happening. Starts in, late November for the most part, into December, January. Grades come out after the first few weeks in January, same as every other law school. And then students are sort of applying for 1L jobs, roughly into, early spring.
Okay. And so then they work in their 1L summer.
They work in their 1L summer.
And then they again work in their 2L summer.
And they work again in their 2L summer.
And those are usually different.
Those are usually different jobs. Sometimes, a student might work at a firm for their 1L summer and they will decide to return there for their 2L summer. But there's no prerequisite job that you have to have during your 1L summer in order to work in a big law firm for your 2L summer.
Got it.
It's more along the lines of, have you progressed along some dimension, right? Have you improved your writing skills? And so you got to do something legal, but
In the 1L summer.
in the 1L summer, but there's no specific types of job you have to do. The hiring for the 2L summer happens, as I mentioned earlier. So that process is really starting to get going in January and February of the 1L year.
Okay.
This is, of course, unfair.
Right.
Because now following the timeline, the students are looking for both their 1L summer job and starting to think about their 2L summer job in that, winter, beginning, January, February months in the winter term. That's a challenge for students where this process is the market has created conditions, so the market has created conditions that are really difficult for students. And so we're here trying to help the students navigate
Sure.
how to balance their time.
So just to wrap that up, so where people work in their 2L summers, when they're in a big law, private sector job, that's usually where they return post-grad. Maybe they'll do a clerkship in between, but there's a presumption sort of, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
But that is not the case. I feel like at this juncture we should clarify, this is not true for all kinds of employment, right? So if you're doing public interest work or government work, the rules and the timelines are quite different. We are focusing in this conversation on private sector.
Very much so.
And we have other people at the law school, and most law schools have this, that are focused, that have expertise in government or public interest work.
Yeah, I mean, our office is kind of all one, everyone's together, but different schools are organized in different ways.
Yes.
Yeah. But generally speaking, big law firms hire their entry-level classes, their entry-level attorneys out of their 2L summer class. There are some non-private sector employers that do that, but very few.
Okay. So my next question then is that given that everything has been speeding up for all these different reasons, does that mean, one, that the first semester 1L grades are really the only grades that matter? That's my first question.
Yeah, I would say no.
Okay.
And then I can expand.
Please do.
That's
We're hanging on your
yeah.
work.
Always answer the question first, then you clarify.
That's called deposition prep, people.
Yeah. So, no, I don't think 1L grades are the only thing that matter. I think, grades. So there's this, on one hand, students will hear things like grades are the only thing that matter to law firms. And on the other, they'll hear from other folks, grades are but one factor of many that firms consider. And these sound like these are in direct conflict, but both are true at the same time. So I think firms use grades in at least two, this is oversimplification, but firms use grades in two ways. So one is like, when we used to come and hire here, like we would look at students and we would sort of evaluate them across like 4 or 5 dimensions.
You mean
Yes.
when you were at the law firm?
When I was at the law firm, and I would come back here to interview students as a hiring partner.
Right.
We would evaluate students across like 4 or 5 dimensions, right? So it would be like, what's your academic performance? What's your drive or interest in the firm or practice areas? What about your communication skills? Your emotional intelligence. Like, let's say that's the...
All right.
If we could reduce all of those to some numeric value, there would be some like benchmark that you had to get over in order to be considered.
Okay.
So in that sense, well, grades is one of those, right? So you're looking for some target sort of grade, right? In that sense, like grades do matter, right? So maybe you're not eligible or you're not really going to be competitive at a particular place because of your grades. But on the other, if you are above whatever the threshold is, now you're looking at the candidate as a whole. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, grades are only one of a number of factors. And I probably feel like that's, I don't know, you tell me, that's kind of the way you think about.
Very similar to the admissions, very similar to the admissions process, absolutely.
So our grades, is 1L grades the only thing?
Specifically first semester 1L grades.
Yeah, no, right? I mean, if you're applying for a 1L firm job, meaning you're a firm job during your 1L summer, you're going to be hired based on one semester of grades. So in that sense, that's the only thing that matters grade-wise for that particular job. But what else are they looking at in your candidacy? They're going to be looking at your communication skills, your leadership skills, your ability to express an interest in the firm or the location or the practice area. Because what they're hoping is that you're there your 1L summer, that you love it, that you come back for your 2L summer. You love it, you're doing well, and then you start there.
Right.
And so the most competitive candidates for 1L firm jobs are not just those who, they've done well in school or well enough in school, but that they've also invested this time in terms of understanding, like, where is it that I might be interested in living? What kind of practice areas exist in that market? Right? Like, put that effort in.
Great. Okay, but does the speeded up process, does that mean that your pre-law school experience is more important to getting a job? And along those lines, do you think there are particular disadvantages for people who are coming straight out of undergrad to law school, or people who are first gen who have to work a little bit harder, frankly, to encounter the kinds of information that you've talked about as being useful?
I think everybody has to sort of invest the effort right away, whether you've worked before law school or not. Maybe working before law school has helped you develop a law. Maybe it has developed, you've clarity in terms of geography. Maybe you have clarity in terms of, I know that these are the things I don't want to do.
Right.
I mean, the elimination is as good a decision-making tool as selection in this context. And so maybe that's helped you. But it's also possible that you've spent a year or two working, in someplace that hasn't developed an interest in a geography or a practice area, but maybe it's helped you mature in some way. You've got a little bit more business acumen. Like, that could be helpful. But for the student who arrives straight through, KDJD, has no lawyers in their family, first gen, whatever the dimensions are that they're feeling uncomfortable, all the resources, at least, here, and I think this is one of the things you think about when you're going to a law school is, like, does this place have the scaffolding that's going to help me progress during my first semester? Because you do want to invest that effort right away so that you are, sort of competitive.
All right. I have one last big question for you, which is, in June 2023, the Supreme Court issued a decision on students for fair admissions, in which they held that that any admissions office, higher ed admissions, cannot take race into account as one factor among many as part of their selection process. So that case was focused on admissions, but has it had any longer tentacles into the legal hiring world?
Yeah. I mean, so there were a couple of follow-up suits that were brought against law firms specifically by the same organization. And so there have been some changes to sort of application descriptions and eligibility requirements that firms have put out there. But it's hard to say whether or not it's actually adjusting anything on the back end from firms. We just don't know that. I guess what I would say, and what I do say when students ask, is, nothing about that decision changed the fundamental reason why firms have, diversity scholarships and diversity fellowship programs.
And what is that reason?
Yeah, I mean, the business case for these programs is you have a better team of lawyers when you have a diverse group from varied backgrounds that are bringing their own perspective and their own ability to connect and bring issues to the table, right? And so the idea that, firms want diverse entering classes, that hasn't changed. Nothing about this decision has changed that.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
All right. Now, Ramji, at the end of every A2Z episode, we like to talk usually about language, something law-related, but often it's language. So this time I'd like to talk about language not really law-related. Specifically, what do you think is the appropriate noun for referring to the iconic Ann Arbor establishment of Rick's, which is a, I'll just say facility because we're working on the noun, a facility that is very popular with law students for nighttime entertainment. And it was recently threatened with closure due to construction, and it has risen from the ashes like the phoenix that it is, and it will stay open to the joy of law students and sentimental alumni everywhere. John, I hope you're watching. What do you think it should be called? Because you took issue with the newspaper calling it a nightclub. Did you not?
Yeah, I don't really feel like Rick's reaches the level of nightclub status. I do think that there is plenty of dancing and nightclub activity happening there, but I don't think
Not quite
really,
fancy enough.
yeah, I don't think it's quite fancy enough.
So what about bar?
I couldn't, I mean, bar is probably okay. It's certainly not a pub.
It's not a dive. It's a little better
It
than a
claims
dive.
to be an American cafe on the door. I don't know that I would describe it as a cafe. It's more of a, it's sort of a, you know, there are certainly law school alums who have met their significant others at Rick's.
Sure.
And it is, I think it's a room of requirements. It's what you need it to be.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I hope the A2Z audience appreciates that. All right. That is all we have. Thank you, Ramji. That was fantastic. I always enjoy talking to you, and it was fun to do it on camera.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. As always, please let us know what you think. Leave a comment below or email us at law.jd.admissions@umich.edu and put vlog in the subject line. Let us know what you want to, if you have any questions, anything you think we should be addressing. And thanks to Dustin and to Alex Lee, who has stepped in because we needed multiple cameras for this exciting Dick Cavett style setup. You don't know who Dick Cavett is, but you should look him up. Okay. So I'll just wind up with wherever you go, go blue.
Go blue.